Rewrite formulas. A formula is a type of literal equation, and a literal equation is an equation with two or more variables. So to solve for one of the variables, you use inverse operations. So just as a review of what inverse operations are, if we have multiplication, the inverse for multiplication would be division, or vice versa. If we have addition, the inverse would be subtraction, or vice versa. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is rewriting formulas or isolating a singular variable. So here's an example. It's asking us to solve for z. So what that means is I want to have z by itself. So you notice in this formula we have capital H equals 1/4 z. And another key note here, when the formula has an uppercase letter, you need to make sure that the new formula also has an uppercase letter. So we don't want to have a lowercase h in our new formula. It must be uppercase H. So I want to isolate z. So that means that I need to get rid of the 1/4. Now 1/4 is attached to z, which is multiplication, and the inverse would be division. But the easiest way to get rid of the fraction in front of a variable is always to multiply by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal here for 1/4 would be 4/1, which is just simply 4. So you're going to multiply both sides by 4 to remove that 1/4 that is attached to z. And you need to make sure that when you multiply a variable by a number, that the number always goes in front of the variable. So you see here I have 4 times capital H, and then you have 4 times 1/4 z. Well, when you have 4 times 1/4, that's going to cancel out, and you're going to simply be left with z. So the formula here for z, it would equal 4 times capital H. This next example here has all variables. It's 3 different variables. And this is known as the distance formula, where distance equals rate times time. And in this case, we want to solve the formula for t, or time. So in order to solve the formula for t, I need to deal with what's attached, which is that r. Because it's attached, it's multiplication, so the inverse would be division. So I need to divide both sides by that lowercase r to get t by itself. So the formula for t here would equal d divided by r. This next example, we're asked to solve for h. Now this is the area formula for a triangle. So capital A represents area equals 1/2 b times h, or base times height. So I want to get the formula for height, or I want to solve for h. And in order to do this, when you have a fraction and a variable attached to the letter you want to isolate, the first thing you want to do is remove the fraction. So in this case, I want to get rid of the 1/2 by multiplying by its reciprocal. Now the reciprocal of 1/2 would be 2/1, which is simply 2. So you're going to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of the fraction. And remember, the number needs to go in front of the variable. So in this case, you're going to end up with 2 capital A equals b times h. I still don't have h by itself, so that means I need to remove what is with it. And I have multiplication here. B is being multiplied to h. And the inverse of multiplication is going to be division. So you're going to multiply both sides by that b to get h by itself. So your new formula, or the formula for height, or h, would equal 2 times capital A, all divided by b. Pause and try. So in order to solve for x, you need to remove that capital A. So the inverse would be division. You're going to divide both sides by capital A, and you have your new formula for x. Capital B, lowercase y, all divided by capital A. Case of letter matters. Pause and try. So you need to solve for q here, which means you need to first get rid of the fraction by multiplying by its reciprocal, and in this case would simply be 3. Once you've multiplied by 3, you're going to end up with 3 capital B equals QS. And now you need to remove that S by dividing. So your Q formula will equal 3 capital B divided by S. So this next example, we have to solve for x. Now notice here in this example, I have y equals x plus 3. And I need to isolate the x, which means I need to get rid of that plus 3. So the inverse of plus 3 here would be minus. So I have to minus 3 from both sides. So I always want to be very clear about this next step. You do not want to attach minus 3 to the y, because if you attach it, then it would be multiplication. So really all you need to do here is rewrite this y minus 3 horizontally versus vertically. So you end up having y minus 3 equals x, or x equals y minus 3. So to solve for x in this case, you need to get rid of plus 3 by subtracting 3. This next example, we're solving for x. I have y equals x minus a, and I need to do the inverse of minus a, and the inverse would be plus. So I'm going to add a to both sides, and I'm going to get my formula for x. X will equal y plus a. This next example is just a little tricky. I want to solve for x, and I have y equals 5 minus x. So the first move you have to do is you need to remove that 5. And 5 is positive, so you're going to have to subtract it from both sides. So you're going to end up with y minus 5 equals, and now that minus is really attached to x. So you end up having a negative x here. And because you need to solve for x, and you have to have x with nothing attached to it, you need to get rid of that minus. And that minus really means you have a coefficient of a negative 1. So in order to get rid of that negative, you're going to need to divide everything by a negative 1. So it's very important that you don't leave the variable you're solving for with anything. If it has a negative, you're going to need to remove the negative by dividing through by a negative 1. Now you're going to need to simplify piece by piece. And I want you to notice here that y is positive, and y divided by a negative 1 will end up being a negative y. And then a minus 5 divided by a negative 1, two negatives create a positive, so that's going to change that to a plus 5 equals x, and now you have x by itself. So the formula for x will equal a negative y plus 5. Pause and try. You're going to add 6 to both sides, and remember, you're not attaching 6 to y, you're just rewriting it so that it's y plus 6. So your x equals y plus 6. Pause and try. You're going to subtract 5 from both sides. You're going to end up with y minus 5. So your x formula will equal y minus 5. Pause and try. So you're solving for r here. You need to first subtract that s. You're going to end up with q minus s equals a negative r. And now you need to get rid of that negative sign. To do that, you're going to divide everything by a negative 1. And you're going to be left with r equals a negative q plus s. So this next formula that we're rewriting has two steps to isolate the variable that we need to solve for. So in this case, we want to solve for x, which means I need to get rid of that plus and then deal with what's attached. So formulas work the same way as equations. When you have a two-step equation, you always get rid of the plus or minus first, and then you deal with what's attached. So in this case, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that plus b, and the inverse of plus is minus. So I'm going to subtract b from both sides. Now keep in mind here, you're not going to attach it to c because it's not multiplication, it's subtraction. So the ax comes down and it's going to equal c minus b. And now you need to deal with what's attached to x. So I have to get rid of that multiplication, and the inverse is division. And I want to be really clear here. When you're dividing, you want to make sure you divide the entire side, that's c minus b by a, not just one piece. The entire side is being divided by a. So your formula would look like this for x. X is going to equal that c minus b all over a. So it's very important that you have that expression on top all over a. Pause and try. You subtract b here, you're going to end up with y minus b equals mx, and then you're going to divide through by m, and your formula for x is going to equal y minus b all divided by m. So this next formula is the perimeter formula for a rectangle, and it wants me to isolate w. So I want to be clear here. The isolate w, I'm not going to deal with what's attached to the w first. I'm going to remove that 2l. And in order to remove that 2l, I need to do the inverse. And because it's positive, the inverse would be negative. So I'm going to need to subtract 2l from both sides. You're subtracting because it's not attached to the variable you're solving for. So I end up with capital P minus 2 capital L will equal 2w. And now I need to deal with what's attached to the w. So I'm going to need to divide through by that 2 in order to get w by itself. When you divide, you have to make sure you divide the entire side by 2 so that P, that capital P minus 2L is all being divided by 2. So your formula for W would equal P minus 2 capital L all over 2. You cannot cancel those 2's out because if you cancel them, you will end up with an incorrect formula. The 2 is being divided into whatever number P minus 2L would equal. So you can't cancel out those 2 or you'll have a wrong formula. Be very careful with that. Pause and try. So to solve for y here, you're subtracting 2x from both sides. You end up with 3y equals 6 minus 2x. And now you need to divide through by that 3, and your new formula, y would equal 6 minus 2x all over 3. There's no simplifying here. 3 can't go into 6 because you have to first find the value of what 6 minus 2x is before you can do the division. Very important. So this next example, I have y that I need to solve for, but I have it in an expression that has a division of a number. So whenever you have an expression being divided by a number, the first thing you're going to need to do is get rid of the number that is dividing into that expression. So I'm putting parentheses around the top just to indicate that that is one unit. You can't get to the y until you get rid of what is divided into that one unit. So the first thing you're going to need to do is the inverse of division, which is multiplication. You're going to multiply both sides. That's going to get rid of that division. Now I want a key note here, and if you noticed I put a box around the 3. Because I have a variable being multiplied by a number, the number always needs to go in front of the variable. So make sure you switch that up. So 3 is being multiplied to C. Now if it was another variable, it wouldn't matter. But because it's a number, it has to go in front of the variable. And now I can get to the y, so I have a two-stepper here. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that plus 2 by subtracting it, and you're going to be left with by equals 3c minus 2, and now you can divide through by b to get y by itself. So your formula for y would equal 3c minus 2 all divided by b. Pause and try. So the first thing you're going to do is get rid of that division by multiplying. You're multiplying by 3. That's going to cancel that out. And remember that 3 needs to go in front of the variable, so you end up with 3k on the other side. And now you can get f by itself by adding 5 to both sides. And then you're going to divide through by 4, and you have your new formula. So this last example, I want to solve for a variable, but the variable is in the denominator or in the divisor. So in order to solve for a variable or isolate the variable, you need it to be on the top. So the first thing I want to do is multiply. Because it's in division, the inverse of division is multiplication. So I want to first multiply both sides by that letter v. That's going to get rid of the variable in the denominator or the divisor so that I can solve for it. So I multiply both sides by v, and I'm left with v d equals m. Now I can actually get v by itself. Now I'm going to divide through by d, and I'll have my new formula. My formula for v would equal m divided by d. Pause and try. Same idea here. I want to get b to the top. To do that, I need to multiply both sides by b, and then I'm going to divide through by r, and I'll have my new formula. b will equal 3 divided by r. And remember, case of letter matters, so make sure that if it's capital, you have capital. If it's lowercase, you have lowercase. So this last example, we're going to be using formulas to actually do application problems. So this formula here, the formula m equals 1/5 t, can be used to determine how far, m in miles, you are from lightning. When it's taking thunder, t seconds to reach your ear. So the m equals 1/5 t is miles equals 1/5 times time, and that's important. So we're asked here, if it takes 5 seconds for the sound of thunder to reach you after you have seen the lightning, how far off is the storm? So what it's asking me here is, use the formula miles equals 1/5 t time to find how far off the storm is when I hear thunder. And in this case, they're saying that I heard thunder 5 seconds ago, and that represents my t. So then what you're going to do is you're going to take that 5 and you're going to evaluate the formula by plugging it into the t for the formula. And then you're going to calculate how many miles off. So now you have m equals 1/5 times 5, or 5 over 1, and when you simplify, you see here that you end up with, in miles, it's going to end up being 1 mile away. Pause and try. So you're asked to convert 23 degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius, and they give you the formula for Celsius, which is 5/9 times parentheses Fahrenheit, or F, minus 32. So what that means is you're going to take 23 and substitute it into F. Now, you need to remember order of operations. Order of operations says You have to do parentheses first before you can do multiplication. So inside the parentheses, we have 23 minus 32, which is going to give us a negative 9. Now you can do the multiplication, and you end up having a negative 9 over 1, so you have fraction to fraction. Simplify, multiply across, so for 23 degrees Fahrenheit, you end up with a negative 5 degrees Celsius.